Well, I hate to be the downer, but it is August and summer vacation is almost over. Boo, yeah. Some of you got to take vacations. Some of you are going on vacation here before school starts. And I wanted to start. We're going to be talking about pilgrimages and trips over the next 5 weeks. And I wanted to start with kind of an honest parent's take on a vacation. So if we could show that video, let's. This is Disney World, by the way.
We made it to the happiest place on earth. It's 9 a.m. I got to schedule every minute of our day until 9 p.m. Pay attention and stay close. I just flew my family halfway across America to visit Disney, and all my homeschool kids want to do is visit the Hall of Presidents. We need a map. $45 for bedazzled mouse ears, baby. You want these or you want to go to college? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's 9:30 in the morning. It's too early to get wet. We're not waiting an hour and a half for impressions of France, okay? Eat a baguette and lose a world war. That's my impression of France. Let's go to Space Mountain. No, I'm not gonna push him in a stroller, okay? He's 4. No, that's not right. The Splash Mountain is this way. No, you cannot have goofy-shaped chicken nuggets. Sit down, your mother brought ham sandwiches. Oh, for heaven's sakes, pick up your garbage and throw it away. This isn't Six Flags. Listen, Rebecca, she's not coming out today, okay? That dream to meet Elsa, you better let it go. Oh, you wanna go to a small world all by yourself, huh? Well, it's gonna turn into a pretty big world when you come outside and can't find your parents. Oh, great, now my wife wants a photo with Gaston. Perfect. Well, hurry up. Make believe your feet aren't sore. This is Disney. Use your imagination. See these locks right here, kids? That's what happens when you disobey your parents. You know what I want to ride? A park bench in the shade. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where's Mackenzie? My goodness, I gotta fake a leg injury or something. I need one of those scooters. Honestly, how are there possibly so many strollers in here? We have been here for 10 hours. I mean, my love language is quality time, but not this much. A 4-hour wait for Toy Story? That line is to infinity and beyond. I feel like we're going the wrong direction. Well, is it air conditioned? If not, I don't want to go. Información. No, it's in Portuguese. No wonder this map doesn't make any sense. If you don't get back here by the count of 3, I will spank you into Tomorrowland.
So that's what us parents actually think on vacations. I know we post all the nice pictures on social media, but that's what's really going on. Over the next 5 weeks, we're going to have an honest discussion about a pilgrimage and really about a journey in our spiritual life. For centuries, really actually into the Bible days, this idea of pilgrimage or taking a journey with God has been synonymous with our spiritual life. You think of Abraham taking a journey from what we would call modern-day Iraq. God calls him to move to an unknown land, which would be the promised land of Israel. You think of the children of Israel being freed from slavery in Egypt, and they take a 40-year pilgrimage from Egypt to Israel. You think of Jesus even. He takes a journey from heaven to earth, and then once he gets here on earth, he has to escape persecution. He becomes a refugee and takes a journey to Egypt as a young boy, comes back from Egypt to Israel, journeys around Israel, and the language of the gospel is it's a journey towards the cross and the resurrection. Now, early in the life of the church, within the first 400 years, the idea of pilgrimage became synonymous with you would go to a sacred place in order to encounter God in a deeper fashion. Eventually, pilgrimage went from like physical language of actually going to a sacred place to just going to a sacred place on your own, wherever you're at, and meeting God there. The Catholics had that journey for hundreds of years. Probably the most famous Protestant to use that language was John Bunyan. Some of you probably read Pilgrim's Progress. It's about a pilgrimage, a spiritual pilgrimage. Well, we're going to be talking about the Vineyard Pilgrimage over the next 5 weeks. And we'll be looking at Paul, the life of Paul. He took physical pilgrimages as he was a missionary and went around the world, but we also see how he developed in his own spiritual life and how he passed that on. And we're going to look at him as an example to follow in our own pilgrimages. So what is a vineyard pilgrimage? It is a framework for picturing a lifelong journey with Christ. The vineyard pilgrimage helps us to have an intentional and continuous journey in our development in all stages of life. It's rooted in the kingdom of God theology. The vineyard pilgrimage encourages every person from the youngest child to the seasoned sage to grow in his ability to love God and to love others. That's the pilgrimage. Now, our journey isn't just among individuals. Our journey isn't even just a church. That we as a church exist as part of a movement called the Vineyard Movement. And over the last few years, there's been given a lot of thought, and there's going to be given a lot of resources and time and money and more thought to developing a pilgrimage. Already, the Vineyard Movement, Vineyard USA, there's about 600 churches in the U.S. Already, we're beginning to develop curriculum for kids, curriculum for teenagers. We'll begin to create more for small groups and on into for adults and parents, and then on to sages. And so we're going to be developing this together. The leader of the Vineyard right now is Phil Stroud. He preached here 2 years ago, and he does a great job in about a 2-minute video of explaining the pilgrimage. So let's take a look. Some of you recognize Phil from 2 years ago. Let's watch that video.
Well, let me explain real quick about Vineyard Pilgrimage, because you're going to hear a lot about it in the years to come. It basically is just a conceptual track that we see people as they come to Jesus, no matter where they come in at an age, but we see it. All the ages are included. We want to be very conscious of the littlest guys and gals in the Vineyard movement. And then seeing certain markers where we really check in with these different age groups. Vineyard Pilgrimage is seeing these littlest guys from, let's say, 4 years old. And we don't just see them as, okay, they're in children's ministry. No, they're part of the Vineyard. They go to a Vineyard church. They're in the Vineyard. They're on Team Vineyard. We're going to check in with them in the 5th grade. We're going to actually begin recruiting them a little bit in the 5th grade, saying, hey, guys, welcome to the team. Let's talk about this. There's some natural transitions. 5th to 6th grade, middle school, going from elementary school to middle school to high school, after high school. What happens? You know, there's a lot of statistics today that are putting fear in people. Like, we're not keeping any of our young adults. Well, it's not true that the statistics don't say that. But even if they're a little bit true, they should motivate us to address that. And that's what we're trying to do with Vineyard Pilgrimage. We want a little bit from the littlest guys to the very sages of our movement. I don't want to have a niche in generations. I think we have to focus in on these littlest guys. You know, they say that 85% of the people that come to Jesus do so between the age 4 and 14. Great. But if we only reach out to them, what happens after they're 14? So we're going to have to address discipleship at every level of the Vineyard. Teenagers, young adults, middle-agers, sages, seasoned saints. Vineyard Pilgrimage is how we're ministering in all of those age groups. I think we're onto something. You're going to hear a lot more about it. That includes curriculum, some real clear ways to connect with each one of these groups as they run on this track called the Vineyard Pilgrimage. I think you're going to enjoy it. Stay tuned.
The pilgrimage is a lifelong journey, and any road trip that we might have will have a map or a GPS. The map gives us directions. There are milestones on any journey. When we take road trips as a family, I have milestones. If it's a long journey, I download some podcasts to bore my family. And but I'm a nice dad, so I don't play them the whole time. So I tell myself, when we go X amount of miles or when we reach this city, I'm going to play this podcast. And I kind of tell them that, and we do that. We did that on the last trip we took. If I'm heading to Northwest Ohio, I have a milestone. I stop in Findlay because there's this place called Deitch's that makes homemade ice cream and chocolate. They have these little turtle chocolate deals to die for. Well, that's a milestone. That's a mile marker for me. I have a lot of food-related mile markers in my journeys. So you want mile markers to tell you where you're at. There are milestones and markers in the faith that make you go, wow, that's cool, that's a great accomplishment, or that's something we need to be celebrating, or that's a milestone. I mean, you think of baby dedications, or graduating from the 5th grade, or graduating from junior high, or from high school. Those are all milestones. You think of salvations, or baptisms, or maybe somebody that doesn't see themselves as a leader, but they say, I'll host a small group so that a leader can lead a group there, leading an outreach, or getting married, having a child, leading somebody to Christ, retiring. These are all like milestones and markers that we can celebrate with people. Like any trip, the Vineyard Pilgrimage has its own markers. Like, you've went this far in the journey, or by the time you hit this age, if you're 5th grade Frankie, here's what you ought to know and be able to do by 5th grade. And so we have these markers in the Vineyard. Today I'm going to talk about mile markers for sages. Now, who are sages? Well, sages are profoundly wise people. It's a person famed for wisdom, someone venerated for the possession of wisdom, judgment, and experience. Sages have reached their golden years. Sages pass on their wisdom and their maturity to the next generation. We want to create opportunities to serve for retirees, that there would be places for them to serve and places for seasoned saints to serve. Now you may be thinking, Joel, I'm like 16 or 26 or 36 or 46. Why should I be thinking about mile markers for sages? I'm young, I'm lit, I'm straight fire, which just says I'm not when I use that lingo. I'm cool. Why do I need to think about sages? Well, the reason is you should listen because we're all getting older. You'll be in your golden years before you know it. But there's probably even a better reason. Just because you reach 60 or 65 or 75 or 80 or 89 or 90 doesn't mean that you've become wise, right? It's the decisions you're making now that help determine that. So if you want to become a sage, you need to listen because you're going to need to make wise choices when you're younger to get there. So what mile markers does the Vineyard have for sages? And we'll be weaving in and out some verses about the life of Paul here. Number one, here's a mile marker. Sages mentor young men and women. We'll look at this more in depth next week as we study the life of Paul and how he mentors Timothy well. But think about Paul. He just mentored people well. He took people along in his journeys. Timothy and Mark got to hang out with a much older Paul. They learned how to do life, how to faithfully follow Jesus, and how to serve others by Paul's example. Timothy goes on to become the pastor of the church of Ephesus. Mark went on to write the memoirs of Peter. We call it the Gospel of Mark. Titus was a young man who oversaw all the churches in Crete, and Paul discipled him to do that. There was a husband and wife team, Priscilla and Aquila, that Paul took under his wing, and they already had some leadership giftings, but he mentored them to be better. They ended up mentoring a guy named Apollos, who was a great speaker, but was deficient in scriptural knowledge, and so it went from Paul to Apollos, or to Priscilla and Aquila. Then they mentor Apollos. He went on to become a great missionary. He was a great elder in the church of Corinth, and there's even some evidence that he may have written the book of Hebrews. So this guy's a big dude. Needless to say, one mile marker we're looking at for sages is, are they mentoring young men and women? We need sages who take teens and 20-somethings and young marrieds and parents of kids and teens and middle-aged people. We need sages that take all those groups under their wings. They can share the good decisions they've made in life. They can also share the bad ones and say, yeah, I wouldn't do this. I made this mistake, and here was the repercussion in my life because of it. Sages can take what they've learned and download it into younger people and help them learn, They can mentor them. And it doesn't just have to be in spiritual kind of skills. I think there are people in their 20s and 30s who would love to sit with someone that just knows about careers and career choices and be able to bounce things off about, hey, I've got this opportunity to go take another career, to go back to school. I don't know what I should do. It just, life skills, woodworking or sewing or how to put things together, different things that how to cook or just simply how not to sweat the small stuff would be a skill many stressed out 30-year-olds would want. And those who are sages can pass that on and talk about how not to sweat the small stuff. So a sage mentors young men and women. Another mile marker is a sage is a spiritual pillar that has a strong voice in the local church. Now this obviously doesn't happen just because you reach a certain age. You have to be building towards it. Older sages made wise choices at younger ages. Older sages made wise choices at younger ages. That's what allowed them to get to the place of being a sage. Listen to what Paul says about his life. In 1 Corinthians 11, he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Or follow my example as I'm following Christ. That's pretty bold, isn't it? Usually if somebody comes to me with a problem, I say, well, let's look at the life of Jesus, or let's look at a verse. But Paul's made enough wise decisions that he's gotten to a certain age, he can say, hey, you want to know how to do life? Imitate me. I'm imitating Jesus. You imitate me. Well, again, that doesn't happen just because you got to a certain age. It means when Paul was younger, he made wise choices in following Jesus over and over again, and he got to the place he could say, imitate me. Or take a look at 2 Timothy 4, verses 4 through 6. He says this right before he died. I want you to listen to this and listen to it in this context. Paul is sitting in a jail cell in Rome waiting to have his head cut off because he has dared to say, Caesar is not Lord, Jesus is Lord. Nero is not Lord, Jesus is Lord. Now you might think, well, Paul lost because he got his head cut off eventually. Well, not really. I mean, people are still following Jesus. People name their kids Paul. They name their dogs Nero. So I think Paul won, you know? So take a look at this. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. Focus on this verse. I have fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Now there's in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not just to me, but to all those who have longed for his appearing. Just think about that. He could say, I've just followed Jesus. I have fought the good fight. I am finishing well this race, this pilgrimage of faith. If you're over 60 in the room, let me just ask you, what kind of legacy do you want to make? What kind of legacy do you live? Think about that. If you're over 60 right now, just begin to think about that real quick. What legacy do you want to leave behind? Hopefully that you get to see when you're still alive, but then when you pass on to the next life with Jesus, that you hope this legacy in your life will continue. If you're over 60, could you just say it out loud? Real loud, just so everybody can hear. What legacy? I'd love to hear those legacies that you want to leave. Family following Christ. Somebody else. It's another legacy you want to leave. Love? Yeah. Live a life of love and pass that on, that others learn how to love. Joy? Absolutely. Just happy and excited and have the joy of the Lord and people around you. Joy's contagious. Another legacy, something you hope happens. Hope that to be a servant. That people would say, man, that dude was a servant. He knew how to love people, serve people, and brought others to do it too. Anybody else? Legacy you hope to leave? Stand firm in what you believe in the Lord. That you have this legacy. Like, man, no matter what happened, they just stood with Christ and what he says and how he says to live. Anybody else? Just a strong faith. To have a strong faith, like you're rock solid. No matter what storms come, you're still trusting Jesus. Now the question for probably everybody, but particularly those of us under 60 is, are we making the kind of choices now that would allow us to leave that kind of legacy? Because one day we'll be above 60, we'll be above 70, we might be 80. And we'll be wanting to leave a legacy like the ones that have just been shared. Are we making the choices now to get there? A sage is a spiritual pillar. They have a strong voice in the local church. Let's look at another mile marker. Sages pass wisdom and maturity on to the next generation. They pass wisdom and maturity on to the next generation. Sages in the room, you have a ton of life experiences and wisdom to pass on. Listen to what Paul told a pastor in Crete, Titus, a guy that he had mentored, who pastored all the churches on that island of Crete. He told him this in verse 2, teach the older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in endurance. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine. I always thought that was a funny way to say that. You might be addicted to a little wine, but not much. I just always thought that was a little weird. But to teach what is good. Then they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled and pure, to be busy at home, to be kind, subject to their husbands, so no one may malign the word of the Lord. You say, man, the older dudes, they need to be worthy of respect, and then the younger ones need to be listening to them. And then the older women were in the same way to pass on wisdom they had accumulated to the younger women. even to urge them, to cheer them on, to keep maturing in their faith, growing in their relationship with God and with their family members. The songwriter of Psalms in Psalm 71 put it this way: even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come. Your righteousness, God, reaches to the heavens. You who have done great things, who is like you, God? As a sage, you get to pass that on. Don't you just love that? Keep me around, God. Don't let me die until I pass on your power to the next generation. See, the next generation needs to hear from our sages. They need to hear the journey you've walked with God. They need to hear how God has been faithful through very difficult seasons in your life. They need to hear how God interrupted your life and showed up, how his power altered the course of your life, answered a prayer, healed somebody, set somebody free, transformed your own life. They need to hear that, and you as a sage get to pass that on to the next generation. That's part of being a sage. You have a right to talk because you've been through life experience and you've stayed loyal to Jesus, and you can pass that on. Sages, who has God put in your life to pass on wisdom and maturity that you've accumulated? Perhaps it's a neighbor, a young family member. Perhaps it's informally. Maybe you don't have a formal kind of mentoring relationship type thing, but you're passing on things to other people. I think of Jim and Carolyn and running the food pantry, and the many teens and even 20 and 30-somethings that help out there and are able to pass that on. I think of our VBS crew in the kitchen that some of our sages were in there serving, and they were able to bless the kids and interact with every new group of kids every 20 minutes that came through there. They were able to interact with them and to pass on love and joy and happiness along with a few snacks. I think of Steve Malone, who was baptized a few weeks ago, as he takes out the trash on Thursdays here. And we've had this summer a group of Goodwill boys, 4 to 5 guys from a Goodwill work program, and they've been serving every day. And I think of Steve just taking them along and showing them how to take out the trash. Or one day they cleaned all the trash cans, just doing these different things and just interacting with teenagers. I think of Richard and Kathy Honecker working with our middle school boys and girls, teaching them faith and life skills. I mean, you could volunteer with children's or youth ministry to pass it on. You could volunteer at a school. They're always needing grandparents or older folks to read at the schools to children. How is God asking you and calling you to pass on the wisdom and maturity that he's given you as a sage? Number 4 mile marker. A sage takes a place of honor and value in the life of the church. And some of these overlap, obviously. Now, this one requires work on the sages, and it also requires work on the rest of the church. Those who are sages in our midst must take up their place, not shrinking back, but actually taking their place as people who can speak into other people's lives or be leaders or to serve. But there's also a responsibility on everybody else's part to embrace sages. We live in an age that does not respect age. In every other culture around the world, gray hair and getting older is respected as wisdom, and they're honored in their culture. But we avoid it at all costs. We use, hair coloring or maybe Rogaine or wrinkle cream. If you listen to interviews, actresses reach a certain age and no longer receive great scripts, People who are getting older in the job force begin to worry about age discrimination. Those who are even in their 50s worry about if they need to switch careers and get a job, it can even be tough as young as in the 50s to get a job because of age discrimination. Paul told his young mentee, Timothy, to teach the Ephesian church to give a place of honor to the sages. In fact, Timothy was charged with rooting out some false teaching that was happening in their church. And some of that false teaching was coming from some of the older folks. But listen to how Paul says to deal with them. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters with absolute purity. It's just this idea that you're supposed to treat people with respect and love. Even Timothy, he's telling, hey, Timothy, I know you got to root out some bad teachings. There are a couple of the older folks that you need to confront, but don't treat them harshly. Treat them with respect. I want us to listen to a 2-minute video from Johnny Shapiro. Johnny was a pastor for 45 years, most of that time within the Vineyard movement, and he has something to say about sages. Let's listen to that.
In addition, of course, to knowing who you are in God, having people around you that have been in the battle, have been in the trenches, have struggled, pay attention to them, honor them. I've always felt that the way we leave something is the way we enter. So if you do have to move on, you do have to leave something, leave well, so that when the time comes that you need to enter something, you enter well. But the term sage has been thrown around a lot, and it's generally difficult for those who are that to see themselves as that. But if you're a young person and you identify someone as that, get near them. Ask them the hard questions. Ask them the deep questions. Ask them to share with you what were the things in their life that were key things that took place at critical moments in their experience that literally changed the trajectory of the direction that they went. Did it have to do with their marriage? Did it have to do with how they led with leaders? Was it their personal, private life that they took authority over and had disciplines in that they allowed to drive them? These things are just critical in getting right the earliest possible time you can. I have unfortunately seen men and women who have never gotten them right. They've not paid attention to them. And they have struggled and imploded in many cases late in life, which is so devastating to the kingdom, to a person's self, and to their family. So get around someone that can help temper who you are, how you see yourself. Be willing to hear the hard things.
So sages have a place of honor in the church. They take their place of honor, but then the church gives them the honor and respect that they're due. The final mile marker in the Vineyard pilgrimage for sages is sages seek to grow in every area of life and to finish well. We already saw that with Paul. He said, I'm finishing the race, I fought the good fight. There's a 2,700-year-old worship song that puts it this way: the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Planted in the house of the Lord, they'll flourish in the courts of our God. Listen to this. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green. We're blessed to have some sages in our midst, aren't we, that are still growing and bearing fruit. Post 60, post 70. We're blessed to have that. And I would encourage everybody, as you approach that age, or as you think about it as a young person approaching that age, to think about this isn't a time to quit or shrink back. It's a time to keep going for it in the Lord, to keep growing and staying fresh and green, as the psalmist says. Older sages made wise choices at their younger ages, and that allows them to hit these mile markers. Those are the mile markers we'd like all Vineyard folks to hit by the time they reach at least their retirement age. I want to look at one more thing in the life of Paul that I think has made him a true sage. If you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Corinthians 9. 1 Corinthians 9. We're going to take a quick look at this. The context for this passage is Paul was taking a lot of heat for how he conducted himself as a leader. Believe it or not, he was at this particular church. He was working bivocationally. He was a full-time tent maker, making money by making tents and working with canvas and leather. But in their culture, they were used to philosophers being paid by a group. And at times, whatever group was paying philosophers kind of controlled what the philosophers said. And Paul said, you know what, that's not me. I'm free to take a salary if I need to from the church, and I'm free not to. I am free. And he goes on to defend himself. He was also taking heat because he was not one of the 12 original apostles. And so he's defending himself, and he's saying why he is why he is an apostle and why he's free to if he works full-time for a church or not. And they were mad at him for not working full-time with him. He jumps off of this idea of freedom and being free to begin to defend himself, because another accusation he was facing was, he goes, "You're always a chameleon, Paul." Like when you were Jewish people, which he was a Jew, when you were Jewish people, you dress like Jews, you eat like Jews, you even worship like Jews, as long as it doesn't go against the Christian faith. Then when you're with Gentiles, man, I mean, you are looking like a Gentile, eating like a Gentile. Pork's no longer a problem, and you're on this end of things. When you're with a group of people who have wine and meat that had been given to an idol as worship, had been used in a sacrifice and then sold at the marketplace after it had been poured out or used in a sacrifice, that they then would sell whatever was given to idols, they would sell in a marketplace. When you're with people that doesn't bother their conscience, like they can drink the wine and eat the meat and they don't think that they're worshiping the idol, then you eat the meat and you drink the wine. But if you're sitting with people that when they're eating the meat and they're drinking the wine, they're going, "Oh man, this was sacrificed to an idol. This is bad. I shouldn't be eating it because I'm like participating in idol." When you're with those people, you don't drink the wine and you don't eat the meat. What gives? You say you have freedom, but why are you always such a chameleon? Look at his response, and I think his response shows us how to be true sages, and it made him a true sage. Verse 19, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave," literally a household servant, kind of the lowest in the house, "to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like those not having the law, though I am free from God's law, but under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law," meaning the Old Testament law. "To the weak I became weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all of this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings." Paul starts by saying that though he was totally free, he didn't belong to anybody, he did consider himself a slave. He made himself a household servant to everyone because his goal was to reach everybody for Christ. It meant emphasizing and appreciating his Jewishness when he was around Jews that he could win to Jesus. It meant living in freedom to live like a Gentile, dress and talk and eat like a Gentile, if that would win them. He would lean certain ways in order to reach people for Jesus. On Mars Hill in Athens, they appreciated philosophy. So you can read in Acts, he leaned towards philosophy and talked very fluently and quoted philosophers. Why? Because his goal in life was to lean towards the people that he wanted to reach. So what does all this have to do with the sages? I mean, we don't have a Jewish culture and a Gentile culture in Lancaster. We don't have a Mars Hill where philosophers gather. What I do think we may have, that we've had predominantly in this country since the 50s and 60s, is more and more we have a youth culture, we have a kid culture, we have a teen culture, we have a 20-something culture. And one thing I'd love to challenge our sages, and our sages here do so well, so I'm more or less encouraging them because they do so well, is one thing we'll have to do as we continue to get older is choose to use our freedom like Paul did. He didn't use it for his own benefit. He used his freedom to lean towards the people he wanted to reach for their benefit. You know, one of the things I love about the Vineyard is so often we have visitors that come and people who stick who are 60 or 65 or 70 or 75. They'll tell me over and over again, one of the things I love about the Vineyard is that I can look over here and see a couple rows of young people. And if you're older than that and you're sitting in the first 3 rows, feel good. You just got included in the younger people thing. So yeah. They love seeing the VBS stuff. I'm here to tell you what we will have to be careful of is to continue to use our freedom as adults, particularly I think, I'm not just talking to the sages 60 and above, I'm talking to people my age that helped plant this church. We will have to consciously and intentionally choose to use our freedom and the honor that the Lord gives us as the people who lead the church or serve, or the core group of the church, or the people who planted the church, or the people who are sages now that have honor and wisdom. We will have to use our freedom and intentionally choose to lean backwards, to lean young, so we assure ourselves that these rows continue to stay here, and don't just stay here, they actually grow. Christy and I gave a ride to somebody. They were a pastor's daughter. They're no longer in the area, but this was years and years and years ago, probably 19 years ago. We gave a daughter of a pastor here in town, a traditional church. We gave her a ride once, and about a 3-hour ride, so we're talking about everything. And we're in the car, and I just asked her, I didn't know her real well. I said, hey, how's the church going that your dad pastors? I'd met him once or twice, and she goes, it's really, really difficult. Like, we're having some big arguments over worship. And I was like, what's going on, She goes, well, we got new hymnals. I was like, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, well, they must have like new modern praise choruses in them or worship songs. So is it the songs that are in the hymnals? Is that what they're arguing about? I said, no, they're arguing about the hymnals not because of new songs, but they're new and they're bigger. And the older folks are complaining that they're too heavy to hold. Oh, okay. We've gotten to that level. We're arguing about the weight of the hymnals. Kid you not, 6 years after that conversation, that church no longer existed. Gone. I had some interactions with them. They'd gotten down to 15 or 20, and the youngest person was 62. See, when this church was planted, I was 26. And everybody in our church except one couple was 30 and under. Most were 26 and under. We're pretty young. Our generation, I'm talking below the sages now, our generation, we have to be real careful that we don't try to keep the Lancaster Vineyard the best of 1998 or the best of 2008. That means the language we use, the dress we use, the style of worship we do, the instruments we use, whether we use more synthesizers and drum loops, or whether we have different lighting, or the decorations we use. We'll have to be intentional not to leave our middle-aged folks, or like myself, or our sages behind, but that us in the middle age and the sages will have to say, I have freedom to go wherever I want and do what I want. Jesus has made me free, but I choose to use my freedom to lean back to make sure the legacy I have gets passed on to another generation, so that I'm assured there's a second floor and a nursery wing that's always packed, and there's 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to maybe a whole section full of people, 14 to 18 to 20 to 25. Paul was a true sage, not only because he made wise choices at a younger age, he was also a sage because he was willing to lean younger as he grew older. We do this in our physical life, don't we? Like, I've seen this in both sets of grandparents of in our kids' life, that, all of a sudden the nice decorations start going up higher when you have grandkids. You ever notice that? My mom's coat closet, which used to be pristine, was just shoved in with toys and board games and everything else. And there'd be big bricks and Legos making stadiums and racetracks and cars, and 2 middle-aged people at the time on the floor with their grandkids playing those things. They leaned younger. Dan and Jackie did the same thing. They leaned younger to their grandkids, and guess what? Their grandkids love them. And they're passing on a legacy. Well, we get to do that in our middle age and in our sages spiritually. That we can decide as a church that we'll lean younger so we can pass on our faith to younger and younger generations. And it may mean giving up some freedoms, that it's not always done the way we'd like, but if in order to win some young folks, I'm not talking about being the niche church like Phil was on this video of, being a church for 14-year-olds. I love 14-year-olds. But I don't want a whole church full of 14-year-olds, So, right? You need leaders. You need wisdom. I don't want to be a niche church for millennials, because eventually the millennials will be the sages and there'll be some other niche behind them, right? Like if we're a boomer church, then the ship's done sailed. If we're a Gen X church, what? I mean, do you get it? You just have to continue to lean younger with each new generation and keep passing on the faith to folks. Well, I think I have a concluding story, but you've heard me talk enough. So I think I'll wrap up. What I sense like the Lord would have us do is bless our sages. And so I'm going to just have us stand for ministry time right now. And I'm going to ask you to do a very vulnerable thing. If you're 60 and above, and you might not even consider yourself a sage, but I think the Lord is calling seasoned saints, our older folks, to begin to see themselves as having something worthy of passing on to somebody else. If you're 60 and over, would you do me a favor and just begin to make your way up front? You can just kind of stand right here. You don't have to come up all the way to the stage. You can just stand in front of the first row of the people that are here. You can get right in front of them. So if you're 60 and above, and leave a little room in front of you because there's going to be some people praying for you. Would you join me? These are men and women that have lived a good life. They're still living great lives, and they are sowing in. When I was thinking of my concluding story, and I won't start it now, but just it was easy to come up with examples on conclusions. I had a hard time narrowing them down because so many of our sages are engaged in the life of this church. They're serving in food pantries, serving in children's ministry. They're hosting a small group. They're leading a small group. They're on the prayer team. They're praying for people. They're a greeter. They're helping people. So would you do me a favor, and would you help me honor and bless these that are standing here? Thank you for your service. And our word to each and every one of you is, we need you. We need your voice. Everybody standing behind you needs what you have. They need the legacy that you're leaving over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years of your life. They need the faith that you've walked out, the good times, the hard times, how you built your life on the rock and the storms came and you were still standing. People behind you need to hear that.